I'm sure most of you know by now that Cedar Point is one of the most sought-out amusement parks in the world due to its vast collection of high-quality roller coasters. Let's not waste any time and get into the top 15 roller coasters at Cedar Point. Wilderness Run is a great starting coaster for young kids, as it only reaches a top speed of 6 miles an hour, a speed slower than that of the chain lift on most roller coasters. There's not much to be said about this coaster, so let's move on. Woodstock Express is a very small family coaster, a step up from Wilderness Run. It reaches a greater max speed just under 30 miles an hour and has a layout filled with an abundance of turns and helices around its compact plot. This is another great beginner coaster that can be the next stepping stone for young coaster lovers once Wilderness Run is conquered. I rode Corkscrew a long time ago and my memories were a bit fuzzy, so this year I decided to take a ride on it and refresh my thoughts. While the seat design is far from comfortable, the track work was much smoother than I had remembered. The drop is followed by a jarring airtime hill and a forceful loop, leading into a turnaround and those iconic corkscrews over the path. Corkscrew is not as unbearable as I remembered it, but I would still rather ride any other major roller coaster at Cedar Point than this. I've heard that sitting in the back of the train is better for the first drop, but I've never ridden there so I can't speak from experience. Just ride in any row and wait for it to be over. It's not really worth riding. I honestly have a soft spot for Cedar Creek Mine Ride, and I think it gets a bit too much hate. It's just a fun mine train that goes through a bunch of turns and helices. The transitions are a bit bumpy, but it gives this classic ride some character. This isn't something I'd go out of my way to ride, but I like to get on it once every couple visits. I didn't ride Iron Dragon in 2022, so I don't have the most clear thoughts on this ride, but what I do remember from previous years is a mild collection of turns throughout the layout, the first part through a few trees, and an ending helix over some water. Generally, for aero suspended coasters, the back of the train offers a slightly more thrilling ride than the front, and that goes for this one as well. Blue Streak is the first major roller coaster I ever rode, and it honestly scared the crap out of me back then. I remember an experience filled with terrifying floater airtime and butterflies in the stomach, an unfamiliar sensation that I had no way to prepare for. My rides since then have given me a more accurate perspective, as this ride is just a slightly worse version of the racer at Kings Island. It still has some fun airtime going out and back, but the experience is nothing to rave about. For the smoothest and most comfortable ride, I would recommend sitting in either the very front row or in the middle of a car, like row 2, row 5, row 8, etc. Rougarou was also one of the first major coasters I rode, and I'm still a fan of this unique floorless experience. The straight drop gives a little float if you're sitting in the back, which is rare for this ride model. The loop and the dive loop are standard, followed by a dull elevated turnaround. Following this, the ride takes a unique turn, heading into an inclined loop and a rapid transition from left to right. This can be rather uncomfortable for some, but because my head clears the over-the-shoulder restraint, I don't have to worry about headbanging as much. The second half has a corkscrew, but after that it just meanders around until it finally finds the final brakes. Rougarou is a fun ride, and I have many fond memories of riding it in my earlier years, but the experience itself doesn't hold up to what else the park has to offer. Gatekeeper is a coaster that I've seen people rank as the best B&M coaster in the park, but I wouldn't go that far. The location of the lift hill right next to the lake as well as the colors look amazing, and the ride itself is really fun. The inversions are rather nice and floaty, and the track is glass smooth. The major critique I have for this ride is that there isn't one particular element or part of the ride that I consider to be great, as nothing really stands out for me. It's a great fun ride for sure, but nothing to rave about. A lot of people like the back seat for this one, but I like the front as it gives a great view and the inversions feel extra floaty. Gemini is a classic steel hybrid with a wooden coaster style layout, delivering some fun airtime and near-miss effects throughout the ride. I recommend the blue train for this one for reasons I'll get into later. The first drop is really fun in the back seat, and the various drops throughout the ride deliver some solid floater airtime. The best part of the ride is after the second turnaround, when you drop down into this airtime-filled descent that delivers an insane near-miss with the above supports. For this element alone, I love to sit in the blue side near the back of the train. Gemini just delivers a really fun classic experience that I am definitely a huge fan of. Valravn is often regarded as a forceless ride with a disappointing ride experience, but I personally am a big fan of this coaster. I love the amazing view you get hanging over the first drop, the feeling of free fall down the 214-foot descent, and the hang time filled inversions. The restraints on this one are unpopular, but I don't really mind them, probably because I haven't experienced any of the quote-unquote superior dive coasters that have the less restricting classic over-the-shoulder harness. I like the front row on Valravn because the view while you're on the holding brake over the drop is amazing, and the sense of speed is excellent. The back row may deliver better airtime over the drop, but I prefer the speed in the front. Raptor is a coaster that everyone else in my family finds quite painful and rough, but I love it for the classic experience. I'm 6'3", so my head clears the over-the-shoulder restraints, resulting in no headbanging during the layout, which really helps me enjoy this experience. The first drop is highly underrated, providing some surprising floater airtime and butterflies in the stomach, but this sensation is only experienced to its fullest if you are seated in the very back row, far right seat. The layout's first half is full of sizable inversions that are taken at an exhilarating pace, before a second half featuring 2 corkscrews, both of which deliver vicious lateral forces and whip. The finale consists of a forceful double helix as the train keeps gaining speed and the g-forces keep increasing as the helix continues. But beware of the turn to the brakes, as this violent transition may leave a negative impression of the ride, but it just causes me to burst out laughing. Magnum XL 200 was the ride that kicked off the roller coaster arms race of the 90s and the 2000s, yet it still holds up today as an amazing experience. The track work seems very poorly designed by today's standards, but I would argue that those track imperfections actually enhance the experience. The feeling of jostling back and forth while traversing the first hill and turnaround give this ride a classic feel, which I really enjoy. However, the aspect that makes Magnum stand out is the rudimentary shaping on the airtime hills, which provides fun floater airtime in the first half and downright violent ejector airtime in the second half. A lot of people prefer to ride in the magic seat, being car 1, row 3, but I find the back row or second to back row to be much more comfortable and the airtime is far more sustained. I don't know whether this coaster will be permanently closed or renovated and reopened in the future, but it just doesn't feel right to not include this in the ranking. Top Thrill Dragster is the centerpiece in the park's skyline, and the atmosphere of the park feels entirely different without hearing the deafening sound of the hydraulic launch system and the train zooming past. While the ride was short, the experience was unforgettable. Launching at 120 miles an hour while just being held back by a small T-bar restraint was surreal. Pair that with the spectacular view and the 400-foot spiraling drop, and you have an experience that people will wait hours in line for. The front seat was my favorite on this one, as the feeling of speed was unbelievable. Millennium Force is arguably the most iconic roller coaster at Cedar Point, with its memorable blue color scheme and spectacular support structure lined up right next to Lake Erie. Millennium doesn't just deliver in the visual department, as contrary to popular opinion, this ride packs a punch. The first drop gives ejector airtime, the overbank turn delivered the only gray out I've ever gotten on a roller coaster, and the sense of speed you get throughout this long of a duration is unmatched by any coaster. Even in the back seat, the wind resistance felt much more potent than anything else I've ridden, even at later points in the layout when most of the speed has been burnt off. I would say that my personal favorite seat is the back, but definitely try to ride this in both the front and the back if you have the opportunity. While small in stature, Maverick delivers a diverse experience that delivers on almost every aspect of a roller coaster that you could ask for. Riders receive violent ejector airtime while cresting the first drop and 2 airtime hills, as well as crazy lateral snaps in the transitions after the drop, as well as the stangle dives at the end. The inversions are fun and floaty, leading up to the following launch, which is unbelievably exhilarating as the train suddenly accelerates to that top speed. I love the back seat on this one, as the first drop and airtime hills are best experienced when seated there. Steel Vengeance is recognized as one of the greatest roller coasters in the world, and it is not hard to see why. It's my favorite coaster in the park, as well as my favorite overall. The duration is one of the best of any coaster, lasting just under 80 seconds, and the intensity stays at a high level throughout the experience. The first half delivers large airtime hills and inversions with sustained forces, and then the second half dials it up a notch with rapid-fire inversions and violent ejector airtime as the train flies through the wooden support structure. I would highly recommend trying both the front and the back seat, because other than the first drop, the entire first half of the ride is for the most part better in the front because the forces are much more sustained. But that first drop, as well as the entire second half of the ride, are much more intense when seated in the back, so I prefer that seat for Steel Vengeance. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you're subscribed and go check out this video to see where Cedar Point ranks among the best roller coaster lineups in the world.